Welcome to the audiobook edition of Crossing Hearts by Shelfie Bennett, proudly published by Shelfie Publishing. Settle in for a heartfelt journey of love, resilience, and the beautiful complexities of two souls finding their way to each other against all odds. In this contemporary interracial romance, Shelfie Bennett masterfully weaves a story that celebrates love's ability to bridge divides and defy expectations. Whether you're new to the world of contemporary romance or a devoted fan, Crossing Hearts is a story that will captivate your heart and leave you rooting for its unforgettable characters. For those who want to dive deeper into the world of Crossing Hearts, you can grab the digital edition, ebook, by following the link in the description. Don't miss out on having this modern romance on your digital shelf. Now, get comfortable, press play, and let the magic of Crossing Hearts begin. Chapter 1. Opposite Worlds Collide. Naomi Carter adjusted the strap of her emerald green evening gown as she entered the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Event Center. The room glimmered under the light of massive crystal chandeliers, and the hum of polite conversation filled the air. Naomi felt an odd mixture of confidence and discomfort, as she often did in spaces like this. She wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. Being one of the few Black women in her company's executive pipeline had taught her to walk tall in rooms where she didn't always feel welcome, but there was something about these upper-crust charity events that felt particularly alien. The gala was a corporate requirement, and her boss had insisted she attend as a representative of Apex Innovations, a leading tech firm. Networking opportunities, he'd said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Naomi knew better. She was here to be seen as the company's token gesture toward diversity. She scanned the room, clutching her clutch bag tightly. The crowd was what she expected: older, overwhelmingly white, and dripping with wealth. A server offered her a glass of champagne, and she accepted it with a polite smile, though she had no intention of drinking. Naomi sipped cautiously, her eyes darting to the stage where the night's host was speaking passionately about the nonprofit the gala was supporting, an organization called Creative Futures, which provided arts programs for underserved youth. And tonight, we hope to raise enough funds to expand our reach into more schools across the city, the host, a tall man in a crisp navy suit, declared. His voice was warm, with a slight rasp that hinted at long nights or a love for whiskey. Naomi found herself watching him more closely than she intended. He wasn't bad to look at: broad shoulders, a strong jawline, and sandy brown hair that was just messy enough to suggest he didn't take himself too seriously. She guessed he was in his mid-30s, not much older than her. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. Your generosity makes all the difference," the man concluded, flashing a charming smile that drew polite applause from the crowd. Naomi turned away, determined not to linger on his charisma. She was here to make a brief appearance, shake a few hands, and leave. She wandered toward the hors d'oeuvres table, hoping to look busy while avoiding awkward small talk. Just as she reached for a mini quiche, a voice interrupted her. "Careful. Those are addictive." Naomi turned to find herself face-to-face with none other than the gala's host. Up close, his blue eyes sparkled with genuine warmth, and his smile was even more disarming. "I'll take my chances," she replied, arching an eyebrow. He chuckled, extending a hand. "Ethan Hayes, founder of Creative Futures." "Naomi Carter," she said, shaking his hand briefly. "Apex Innovations." "Apex," Ethan repeated thoughtfully. "You're one of the tech sponsors tonight, right?" "That's right." "Let me guess," he said with a teasing smile. "You were dragged here by your boss, and you'd rather be anywhere else." Naomi's lips twitched into a reluctant smile. "Am I that obvious?" "Just a lucky guess." They stood in a moment of comfortable silence, and Naomi found herself surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. But before she could respond, another guest interrupted, pulling Ethan away to discuss the evening's donations. "Enjoy the quiche," he said with a wink before turning to leave. Naomi watched him go, feeling an inexplicable mix of intrigue and frustration. She told herself it didn't matter. She wasn't here for personal connections, and she certainly wasn't here to be charmed by some smooth-talking nonprofit founder. Still, as the evening wore on, she found herself glancing toward Ethan more often than she cared to admit. Naomi made her way to the silent auction table, hoping to linger long enough to justify her presence, but not so long that she'd have to talk to anyone. As she studied a framed painting of a New York skyline, Ethan reappeared, this time with a clipboard in hand. "Naomi," he said warmly, "have you had a chance to bid on anything yet?" "I'm just looking," she replied, keeping her tone polite but distant. "Well, if you're interested, this piece here was painted by one of our students. 15-year-old girl named Tasha. Her talent is unreal, and the proceeds go directly to funding our programs." Naomi nodded, unsure how to respond. While she admired the work Creative Futures was doing, she couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was trying to guilt her into donating. "I'll think about it," she said finally, her voice cooler than she intended. Ethan's brow furrowed slightly. "You know, people like you could really make a difference," he said, his tone still friendly but with an undercurrent of something sharper. Naomi bristled. "People like me? I just mean someone in your position. Successful. You understand the importance of opportunity, and you assume I don't already contribute to causes I care about," she shot back, crossing her arms. Ethan looked taken aback. "That's not what I meant. Maybe you should think about what you're implying before you say it," Naomi said, her voice steady but laced with irritation. The easy connection they'd shared earlier had vanished, replaced by tension so thick it could have silenced the entire room. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but Naomi didn't give him the chance. She turned on her heel and walked away, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and something she couldn't quite name. She found a quiet corner near the bar and took a deep breath. Why had she let him get under her skin? It wasn't the first time someone had made assumptions about her, and it probably wouldn't be the last. She reminded herself that she was here for work, not to spar with the gala's host. Still, she couldn't stop replaying the interaction in her head. His comment had hit a nerve, and she wasn't sure why. Maybe it was because, for a moment, she'd thought he was different. Across the room, Ethan stood frozen, replaying the conversation in his own mind. He hadn't meant to offend her, far from it. If anything, he'd been trying to connect with her, to draw her into the cause he cared so deeply about. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Clearly, he'd misread the situation, and now he'd made things worse. For the rest of the evening, Naomi and Ethan avoided each other, both pretending to be absorbed in the crowd. But neither could shake the feeling that their brief connection, however rocky, was far from over. Chapter 2. An Unlikely Reunion. Naomi Carter had always prided herself on her ability to compartmentalize. Work was work, personal life was personal life, and never the twain shall meet. After the disastrous gala, she had decided to put Ethan Hayes out of her mind. Whatever brief intrigue she had felt about the charismatic nonprofit founder was overshadowed by the sting of his assumptions. Yet, days later, as she sipped her morning coffee at a bustling midtown cafe, Ethan's face flashed in her mind. "Ugh, let it go, Naomi," she muttered under her breath, scrolling through emails on her tablet. Her usual morning routine involved arriving at the cafe early enough to secure her favorite corner seat, ordering a black Americano, and diving into work. The noise of baristas calling orders and the clatter of mugs had become a comforting backdrop to her productivity. This morning was no different, until the cafe door opened, and she heard a familiar voice. "Hey, can I get a medium drip coffee, black?" Her head snapped up instinctively. Standing at the counter was Ethan Hayes, looking as effortlessly put together as ever. He wore a dark green sweater layered under a tan jacket, his sandy hair slightly tousled, as if he'd rushed out of the house. Naomi froze, debating whether to slip out unnoticed or stay and risk an encounter. Before she could decide, Ethan turned, his eyes scanning the room. Their gazes locked. For a moment, neither of them moved. Naomi felt her stomach tighten, unsure if it was annoyance, embarrassment, or something else entirely. Ethan's face shifted from surprise to what could only be described as cautious optimism. "Naomi," he called out, his voice cutting through the cafe noise. There was no escape now. She forced a polite smile and raised her hand in acknowledgement. Ethan approached her table, coffee in hand, his expression a mix of sheepishness and genuine warmth. "Small world," he said, stopping in front of her. Apparently, Naomi replied, her tone neutral. She gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Wanna sit?" "Sure," he said, clearly relieved by the invitation. As Ethan settled into the chair, Naomi mentally prepared herself for an awkward conversation. She wasn't sure why she had invited him to sit. Maybe it was curiosity, or perhaps she wanted closure from their last encounter. "I'm glad I ran into you," Ethan began, his voice earnest. "I've been meaning to apologize for the other night." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I think I came across as presumptuous. I didn't mean to make any assumptions about you or your contributions to the community. That wasn't fair, and I'm sorry." His sincerity caught her off guard. She had expected defensiveness or, at best, a perfunctory apology, but Ethan seemed genuinely remorseful. Naomi leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "I appreciate that," she said after a pause. "But why did you say it in the first place?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I think I was trying too hard. I care so much about creative futures and the kids we serve that I sometimes get overzealous. But that's no excuse. I should have taken the time to understand where you were coming from instead of jumping to conclusions." Naomi studied him for a moment. His eyes held no trace of arrogance, just an openness that disarmed her. Against her better judgment, she felt her defenses start to soften. "Well," she said slowly, "I can understand passion. And I've been known to get a little overzealous myself. Let's call it even." Ethan smiled, a genuine, boyish grin that lit up his face.
"Deal."
The tension between them began to ease, and before long, their conversation flowed naturally. They talked about their careers, their favorite books, and their shared love of jazz music. Naomi found herself laughing at Ethan's self-deprecating humor, and Ethan seemed genuinely interested in her stories about navigating the tech industry as a Black woman. "Honestly," Ethan said, leaning forward, "I don't know how you do it. The corporate world sounds brutal." "It is," Naomi admitted. "But I'm stubborn. I work too hard to get here to let anyone push me out." "I admire that," Ethan said, his voice sincere. Naomi felt a warmth rise in her chest. It had been a long time since someone had seen her determination as admirable rather than intimidating. As the conversation stretched on, the cafe grew busier, and the din of chatter and clinking mugs surrounded them. Neither of them seemed to notice. The hours slipped by, and Naomi realized with a start that she was running late for her first meeting of the day. "I should go," she said, glancing at her watch. Ethan looked genuinely disappointed. "Of course. I don't want to keep you." Naomi hesitated, then added, "But this was nice. Unexpected, but nice." Ethan's smile returned, softer this time. "Agreed. Maybe we could do it again sometime." She hesitated, her mind racing. Was this heading somewhere? And if it was, did she want it too? She had spent so much time building walls around herself, keeping her personal life separate from everything else. But there was something about Ethan that felt different. "Maybe," she said finally, offering him a small smile. Ethan chuckled. "I'll take that as a yes." They exchanged numbers before parting ways, and as Naomi walked to her office, she couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. The next week, Ethan texted her, inviting her to visit Creative Futures. Naomi hesitated before responding. She wasn't sure why she felt so cautious. Maybe it was the fear of stepping into his world and finding out it didn't align with hers. Or maybe she was just scared of letting someone get close to her again. Ultimately, her curiosity won out. She agreed to meet him at the nonprofit the following Saturday. When she arrived, she was struck by the energy of the place. The building itself was modest but vibrant, with walls covered in colorful murals painted by the kids in the program. The sound of laughter and music filled the air as children worked on art projects and practiced instruments. Ethan greeted her at the door, his face lighting up when he saw her. "You made it," he said, his voice warm. "I did," Naomi replied, looking around. "This place is incredible." Ethan beamed. "Come on, I'll give you the grand tour." As they walked through the building, Ethan introduced her to the staff and some of the students. Naomi was impressed by his genuine connection with everyone there. It was clear that he wasn't just the face of the organization, he was its heart. One student, a shy girl named Tasha, showed Naomi a painting she was working on. "Ethan says you're really smart," Tasha said, looking up at Naomi with wide eyes. Naomi glanced at Ethan, surprised. "He did, huh?" Tasha nodded.
"Yeah."
"He said you're like a boss lady." Naomi laughed, touched by the girl's words. "Well, I guess I am." She spent the rest of the afternoon getting to know the students and learning more about creative futures. By the time she left, she felt a newfound respect for Ethan and the work he was doing. Later that evening, Ethan texted her, "Thanks for coming today. It meant a lot to the kids, and to me." Naomi stared at the message for a moment before typing back, "It was my pleasure. You've got something special there." As she hit send, she felt a flutter of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Ethan Hayes was beginning to chip away at her walls, and for the first time in years, Naomi wondered if letting someone in might not be so bad after all. Chapter 3. Sparks of Connection. Naomi checked her reflection in the mirror for the third time. Her natural curls were swept into a high puff, and she had opted for a casual yet polished look. Dark skinny jeans, a flowing mustard blouse, and hoop earrings that added a touch of flair. She told herself it wasn't a date. Ethan had framed the evening as a hangout, but Naomi couldn't shake the nerves bubbling in her chest. "Why am I even nervous?" she thought to herself, adjusting the strap of her purse. It wasn't as if she hadn't been on dates before. But there was something about Ethan, his unfiltered enthusiasm, his ability to disarm her with a single look, that felt different. Riskier. When she arrived at the bookstore, Ethan was waiting outside. He wore a navy blazer over a simple white t-shirt, paired with jeans and boots. His face lit up when he saw her, and Naomi's stomach did a little flip. "Hey," he said warmly. "You look great." "Thanks," Naomi replied, fighting the smile tugging at her lips. "You don't look so bad yourself." Ethan held the door open for her, and they stepped into the cozy space. The scent of old books and coffee wrapped around them like a familiar hug. "This place is amazing," Naomi said, glancing around at the neatly organized shelves and handwritten staff recommendations. "I thought you'd like it," Ethan said, trailing behind her as she wandered toward the fiction section. Naomi picked up a worn copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. "This book," she said, holding it up, "changed my life." Ethan tilted his head. "How so?" "It was the first time I saw a Black woman's voice celebrated like this," Naomi explained. "Janie Crawford's journey, the way she fought for her autonomy and her happiness, felt so personal to me." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I'll admit, I've never read it. But it's going on my list now." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You've never read Zora Neale Hurston? That's unacceptable." "Hey, I'm a work in progress," Ethan said with a sheepish grin. They continued browsing, occasionally teasing each other about their literary tastes. Naomi discovered Ethan had a penchant for science fiction, which surprised her. "You don't seem like the starships and aliens type," she said, smirking. Ethan chuckled. "I like stories that make you think about what's possible. What about you? What's your guilty pleasure genre?" "Romantic comedies," Naomi admitted with a laugh. "The cheesier, the better." "I'll remember that," Ethan said, filing the information away. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and by the time they left the bookstore, Naomi felt lighter, as if she'd shed a layer of armor. The soul food restaurant Ethan had chosen was bustling with energy. The smell of fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread wafted through the air, making Naomi's mouth water. "You've done your research," Naomi said, raising an eyebrow as they slid into a booth. "I might have asked around," Ethan admitted. "I want to make sure I got it right." The gesture touched Naomi more than she wanted to admit. As they waited for their food, Ethan asked, "So, tell me something about you that's not on your LinkedIn profile." Naomi laughed. "You've been stalking my LinkedIn?" "Research," Ethan said with a shrug, a teasing glint in his eye. "Okay, fine," Naomi said, resting her chin on her hand. "Something not on my LinkedIn. I used to want to be a dancer." "Really? What kind of dance?" "Ballet mostly," Naomi said. "I took lessons for years, but my parents were adamant that I focus on academics. They saw it as a hobby, not a career." Ethan's expression softened. That's tough. Do you ever wish you'd pursued it? Sometimes, Naomi admitted. But I don't regret where I am now. Tech isn't exactly the arts, but it still lets me create in a way. Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. I get that. My dad wanted me to take over the family business, real estate development. But I always felt drawn to music and the arts. It's part of why I started Creative Futures. Naomi tilted her head. Do you still play music? Not as much as I'd like, Ethan said, a hint of sadness creeping into his voice. But every now and then, I'll dust off my guitar. Their food arrived, and the conversation turned lighter as they dug into the generous portions. Naomi couldn't help but smile at the way Ethan savored every bite, clearly enjoying the experience. Okay, Naomi said, leaning back in her chair. You've officially earned points for this place. Good to know, Ethan said with a grin. As the night wound down, Ethan walked Naomi to her car. The city lights cast a warm glow over the street, and for a moment, they stood in comfortable silence. Thanks for tonight, Naomi said, looking up at him. It was really nice. I'm glad, Ethan said, his voice soft. Can I ask you something? Sure. Are you always this guarded? Or is it just me? Naomi blinked, caught off guard by his directness. I don't mean that in a bad way, Ethan added quickly. I feel like there's so much more to you than what you let people see. Naomi hesitated, then sighed. I guess I've just learned to be careful. Not everyone deserves to see all of me. Ethan nodded. Fair enough. But for what it's worth, I'd like to earn the chance. His words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Naomi felt her heart flutter, but instead of answering, she simply smiled. Good night, Ethan. As she drove home, Naomi couldn't stop thinking about his words. For the first time in a long time, she felt the faintest glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, letting someone in wouldn't be so bad after all. The following weekend, Naomi found herself standing in front of the modest but colorful building that housed Creative Futures. Ethan had invited her to visit the nonprofit, and despite her initial reservations, she had agreed. She was curious both about the work he did and if she was honest about him. Naomi. Ethan's voice called out warmly as he emerged from the entrance, a clipboard in hand. He wore a casual button-up shirt rolled at the sleeves, paired with dark jeans. He looked entirely in his element. Hey, Naomi said with a small smile. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. I've been looking forward to this, he said, motioning for her to follow him inside. As soon as they stepped into the building, Naomi was struck by the vibrant energy of the space. The walls were adorned with murals and paintings created by the kids in the program, bright, bold, and unapologetically expressive. The hum of voices and the sound of instruments being tuned filled the air. Wow, Naomi said, her gaze sweeping across the room. This place is incredible. Ethan's face lit up. Thanks. It's my happy place. He led her through the space, introducing her to staff members and a few of the students. Naomi noticed how easily Ethan connected with everyone, from the shy middle schooler sketching in a corner to the boisterous group of teens practicing a dance routine. It was clear that Ethan wasn't just the founder of Creative Futures. He was its heartbeat. This is Tasha, Ethan said, stopping by a table where a teenage girl was working on a watercolor painting. She's one of our most talented artists. Tasha, a petite girl with curly hair pulled into two puffs, looked up and gave Naomi a shy smile. Ethan says you're really smart, Tasha said. And a boss lady. Naomi blinked in surprise, then laughed. He said that, huh? Tasha nodded earnestly. Yeah. He talks about you all the time. Naomi glanced at Ethan, who suddenly seemed very interested in the paintbrushes on the table. She decided not to press him on it yet. Well, Tasha, your work is amazing, Naomi said sincerely, admiring the delicate strokes of the girl's painting. Thanks, Tasha said, her smile widening. As they continued the tour, Naomi found herself more and more impressed by the impact Creative Futures had on the kids who came through its doors. She could see how much the program meant to them and how much they admired Ethan. You've built something really special here, Naomi said as they stood in a quiet corner of the building. Ethan shrugged, though his expression was filled with pride. It's not just me. It's the team, the kids, the community. I just had the idea. Naomi shook her head. Don't downplay it. What you're doing here, it matters. Ethan looked at her, his blue eyes steady. Hearing you say that, it means a lot. For a moment, the noise around them seemed to fade, and Naomi felt a warmth bloom in her chest. She wasn't sure what it was about Ethan, but he had a way of making her feel seen in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the day wound down, Ethan offered to walk Naomi to her car. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the street, and the air was crisp with the first hints of autumn. Thanks for coming today, Ethan said as they reached her car. I know this isn't exactly your scene. Naomi leaned against the car door, crossing her arms. What makes you say that? Ethan hesitated. I don't know. You seem more corporate. Not in a bad way, he added quickly. You just have that polished, high-achiever vibe. Naomi arched an eyebrow. And you think I can't hang out with artsy types? Ethan laughed. Fair point. You fit in better than I expected. I'm full of surprises, Naomi said with a smirk. I'm starting to see that, Ethan said, his voice softening. Let me take you to dinner. As a thank you for today. Naomi hesitated. She could feel the pull between them growing stronger, but part of her was still wary of getting too close. Okay, she said finally. Ethan chose a small, family-owned Italian restaurant tucked away on a quiet street. The atmosphere was warm and intimate, with soft lighting and the scent of garlic and fresh herbs filling the air. As they sipped wine and shared plates of pasta, their conversation grew deeper. What about you? Naomi asked, swirling her wine glass. What's something about you that most people don't know? Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Well, here's one. I was married once. Naomi's eyes widened. You were? Yeah, Ethan said, a hint of sadness creeping into his voice. It was a long time ago. We were young and thought we had it all figured out. Turns out we didn't. What happened? We wanted different things, Ethan said simply. She wanted the kind of life my family could give her, big house, country club memberships, all of that. And I wanted something more meaningful. Naomi nodded slowly. That must have been hard. It was, Ethan admitted. But it taught me a lot about what I want in a partner. Someone who values the same things I do. Someone who gets me. Naomi felt her heart skip a beat. She wasn't sure if Ethan was intentionally directing his words at her, but they struck a chord nonetheless. What about you? Ethan asked. What's your relationship history? Naomi hesitated. She wasn't used to sharing this part of herself, but something about Ethan made her want to open up. I was in a serious relationship a few years ago, she said. We were even talking about marriage. But it didn't work out. Why not? He cheated, Naomi said, her voice tight. With someone I thought was a friend. Ethan's expression darkened. That's awful. I'm sorry. It's fine, Naomi said quickly. I mean, it's not fine, but I've moved on. It just made me more cautious about who I let in. Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. That makes sense. But I hope you know that not everyone's like that. Naomi felt a lump form in her throat. I'm starting to see that, she said softly. As the night ended, Ethan walked Naomi to her car once again. This time, there was no hesitation between them. Thank you for tonight, Naomi said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze locking with hers. No, thank you. Before she could overthink it, Ethan leaned in and kissed her. It was soft and tentative at first, but it quickly deepened, and Naomi felt herself melting into him. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that for a while, he admitted. Naomi smiled, her heart pounding. I'm glad you did. As she drove home, Naomi couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of something she thought she had lost, a chance at real connection. Naomi hadn't expected the judgment to come so quickly or so sharply. It started subtly at work, with the usual microaggressions she had learned to brush off. A few raised eyebrows when she casually mentioned spending time with Ethan, and a stray comment from a colleague about how ambitious women like you don't really need a relationship, right? But soon, the whispers grew louder. One Thursday morning, Naomi was sitting at her desk when she overheard a conversation between two co-workers in the break room. "I mean, she's dating some nonprofit guy," one of them said, not bothering to lower their voice. "Really? Doesn't sound like her type," the other replied. "She's so buttoned up. And, intense." Naomi clenched her fists, fighting the urge to storm into the break room and confront them. Instead, she took a deep breath, reminding herself that she didn't owe anyone an explanation about her personal life. Later that day, her boss, Michael, called her into his office under the guise of discussing a client proposal. The conversation quickly veered off course. "Naomi, you've been a rising star here at Apex," Michael said, leaning back in his chair. "But I've noticed you seem distracted lately." "Distracted?" Naomi repeated, her eyebrows furrowing. "I just want to make sure your focus is where it needs to be," Michael continued. "A lot of eyes are on you. This is an important time for your career." Naomi understood the subtext immediately. She had spent years navigating the unspoken rules of corporate America, where Black women were expected to work twice as hard to be seen as half as capable. Any deviation from perfection, real or perceived, was scrutinized. "My focus hasn't wavered, Michael," she said evenly. "I'm fully committed to my work here." Michael nodded, but his tone suggested he wasn't convinced. "Good to hear. Let's keep it that way." Naomi left the meeting fuming. She knew this wasn't about her work ethic or performance. It was about the assumptions people made about her life outside the office. Meanwhile, Ethan was facing challenges of his own. He had spent weeks avoiding a difficult conversation with his father, Richard Hayes, a successful real estate developer who had never understood Ethan's decision to leave the family business. Ethan knew that introducing Naomi into the equation would only complicate things further, but he also knew he couldn't avoid it forever. One Sunday afternoon, Ethan drove out to his parents' estate in Connecticut, the sprawling house standing as a testament to his father's success. Richard greeted him in the study, a cigar in hand and a skeptical expression on his face. "Ethan," Richard said, gesturing for his son to sit. "To what do I owe the pleasures?" Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I wanted to talk to you about someone I'm seeing." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Oh, this is new. What's her name?" "Naomi," Ethan said. "She's an incredible woman, smart, driven, kind. I think you'd really like her." Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "And what does Naomi do?" "She's in tech," Ethan said, choosing his words carefully. "She's a senior manager at a major firm in the city." "Impressive," Richard said, though his tone lacked warmth. After a pause, he added, "And she's Black, isn't she?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Yes, she is." "And what does that have to do with anything?" Richard exhaled a plume of smoke, his gaze steady. "You know how this family operates, Ethan. Appearances matter. Perception matters." "You mean your perception," Ethan shot back. Richard frowned. "It's not just about me. Think about the circles we move in. People will talk. They always do." Ethan stood abruptly, his fists clenched at his sides. "I'm not interested in living my life based on what other people think. Naomi makes me happy, and that should be enough." "Happies?" Richard repeated, his voice cold. "Happiness is fleeting, Ethan. You need stability. Compatibility." Ethan shook his head, his chest tightening. "You don't even know her. And honestly, I don't care if you approve or not. I'm not here for your permission." Richard's expression darkened, but he said nothing as Ethan turned and walked out of the room. Later that week, Naomi and Ethan met for dinner at a quiet restaurant near her apartment. Both of them were carrying the weight of their respective challenges, though neither wanted to burden the other with their frustrations. The evening started off light, with Ethan regaling Naomi with stories about the kids at Creative Futures. But as the conversation shifted to Naomi's work, her mood darkened. "My boss had a talk with me this week," she said, swirling her wine glass. "Apparently, I'm distracted." "What?" Ethan said, his brows furrowing. "That's ridiculous." You're one of the most focused people I've ever met. Naomi sighed. It's not about my work. It's about how I'm perceived. The moment I step out of line, they're ready to question my commitment. Ethan reached across the table to take her hand. I'm sorry you have to deal with that. It's not fair. Naomi appreciated his support, but a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan didn't fully understand the pressures she faced. What about you? She asked, changing the subject. Have you talked to your dad about us? Ethan hesitated, and Naomi immediately sensed the tension. I did, he admitted. And he wasn't exactly thrilled, Ethan said carefully. Naomi frowned. What does that mean? It means he has his biases, Ethan said, his tone defensive. But that doesn't matter to me. I told him that I care about you, and I'm not going to let his opinions get in the way. Naomi pulled her hand back, her appetite suddenly gone. Biases? That's putting it lightly. Ethan sighed. Naomi, you know how he is. He's old-fashioned and set in his ways. But I'm not him. That's not the point, Naomi said, her voice rising slightly. The point is, your father's opinions don't just disappear. They create ripples. And those ripples affect me, whether I like it or not. Ethan leaned forward, his expression earnest. I know this is hard, but I'm willing to fight for us. I need you to trust that. Naomi stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of frustration, sadness, and something she couldn't quite name. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that their connection could withstand the challenges ahead. But the weight of their different worlds felt heavier than ever. I need some time to think, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's face fell, but he nodded. Take all the time you need. I'll be here. As Naomi walked home alone, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something fragile. And for the first time since meeting Ethan, she wasn't sure if their love was strong enough to survive the cracks.